Hi, it's been a while.
You're a fucking idiot.
Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make a special episode of Anime Hole for Halloween, so this month I'm making up for that by taking a look at an anime that essentially started as a lower budget ripoff of two great horror films that you most definitely are aware of, which we will get to that later. An anime that when I first watched it, I had absolutely no expectations whatsoever whether it was going to be any good. And it does end up with some faults, but by the time I was done watching it, I was absolutely shocked by how it took my expectations and blew them out of the water and ended up defying expectations. That anime is Lilycat. Lilycat is a horror OVA released in 1987 by Studio Pierrot, a studio that you may not know of by heart or be aware of their existence, but if you've seen anime long enough, you've definitely seen one of their works, whether it be older fan faves like Urusei Yatsura or even Yu Yu fucking Hakusho, but also much newer anime such as adapting Naruto, Tokyo Ghoul, and Black Clover into animated shows, but also worked on a few episodes of The Legend of Korra, believe it or not. As for the anime's director and writer, the OVA was directed by Hisayuki Toriumi. While not as recognizable of a name today, he has worked on some classic animes like Speed Racer and Science Ninja Team Gatchaman. So it seems like the narrative would at least be in worthy hands. As for the direction, you have absolute legends of the craft such as legendary artist Yoshitaka Amano, most known for his work on Final Fantasy and Vampire Hunter D, and Yasuo Miyametsu, most known for his work on Kite, and one of my favorite animes of all time, Mezzo Forte. And yes, I will review both of these in due time. So you may be asking, why did you have no expectations of this anime before you watched it despite the pedigree of the people working on it? Well, I mean, look at this cover. Do you have any expectations for this anime? It also didn't help that despite anime in Japan being a much more accepted niche in Japan, there was still plenty of anime being made with low enough budgets in the hopes of making more of a profit than the amount the studios put into it to make the anime in the first place, resulting in shit piles of horrible anime that have no business of being on store shelves. And unfortunately, on the very same shelves sat Lilycat. However, that didn't stop people from at least attempting to sell VHS copies of it, as even in the West, Streamline Pictures, the very same Streamline Pictures responsible for bringing Akira into the West back in the late 80s, apparently saw something in Lilycat that made it worth their while to bring it over onto American shores. But this was the late 80s to early mid 90s, and there was nothing less cool at the time than to be an anime or manga nerd. And not only that, be sandwiched between a bunch of other budget titles. There it sat on the shelves, doing poorly in sales alongside other titles Streamline was floundering to sell as well, ultimately the company going under around 1996. Lilycat suffering the misfortune of not only being poorly sold, but also going out of print. Until it wasn't. You may have actually wondered how I have this copy of this anime on DVD in my hands. Well, thank Discotek Media for that. Yup, thanks to Discotek Media, savior of older and more obscure anime titles, this anime is once again available for purchase, and bless Discotek Media for doing so, because Funimation ain't saving these older titles, so if it wasn't for companies like Discotek, such anime may have been lost to time. But of course, this is a review show, and like I said earlier, this anime does have some faults. But as I tipped my hand earlier, it does do things right. But the question is, by the end of it, how good is it really? And is it worth buying a copy to add to your collection? Well, let's find out together. This is Lilycat. I think the best part to start with when it comes to Lilycat would have to be the visuals. How does it look? Is the animation quality good? And the answer to all that is yes. It's not the greatest looking anime for its time, but it is serviceable. In all honesty, there isn't much to complain about. When it comes down to it, the character designs, animation, art direction, it's all pretty serviceable, especially considering the time it came out, and the budget they had to work with. To be honest, the main complaint you can lob at it is the fact that it had a low budget. But even I break wind at that fallacious fucking bullshit, because to be honest, despite the low budget Studio Pierrot had to work with, they still managed to pull off some technically impressive stuff. I mean, watch this. See that? Looked pretty good, didn't it? Yeah, it was a single rotoscoped walk around the corner to the end of the hall shot, but considering the technical knowledge and skill needed to make the scene on display, the fact that it didn't look out of place and was used only once during the whole anime in an attempt to build tension and all on a tight budget, consider that attempt successful, my friend. But it's not just that specific example. In fact, there are multiple moments in the anime I can think of that did impress me with the attention to detail and the quality of the animation on display. Even shots as innocuous, slow, and deliberate as two people slowly undressing their spacesuits, one of which unzipping 2 layers of their suit on the other guy's back before putting the suit away and closing the locker, shows the level of attention to detail and thoughtful purpose for its inclusion that I don't really see that much nowadays. I know how that sounds, praising a particularly slow shot of 2 people doing something as innocuous as putting away their spacesuits, but it's details like these, especially in horror films, that build mood. And Studio Pierrot knowing when and where to put these shots is what matters, and it succeeds. Overall, the animation is well done, scenes are paced properly, and when the anime picks up steam, especially in these short bursts throughout the movie that are well placed, the low budget doesn't seem that small. Also, another thing I really appreciate in regards to the art direction is the character designs. The thing that stands out to me, especially in terms of comparing and contrasting to more modern anime productions, is how down to earth and more realistic the characters look. These characters overall look like they could exist in real life, and it's something that definitely helps add to the mood of the anime, considering that it's a horror film, and being able to look at them as real people you could probably relate to, and not just some overt anime trope archetype, is refreshing. That being said, considering how understated the design sensibilities are when it comes to the designs, it does mean that they don't stand out as much in a sea of anime. But that's not to say they aren't well designed. One of the mistakes that a production can make when creating more realistic and down-to-earth characters is the designer can often make the mistake of making the characters blend together and make it hard to tell the difference between them. However, the cast, thankfully, is very diverse in more ways than one, not just in gender and race, but also ethnicity, and even body type and age. Clearly, Yoshitaka Amano and Yasuo Miyametsu clearly put in a bunch of thought when it came down to the designs to make it easy to distinguish who is who, without the characters having to look over the top and be in your face to be memorable. Overall, there's very little to say that is bad about the overall aesthetics of the film. For its budget and overall for the time period, it looks pretty good and holds up pretty well despite its age. And that's a good thing. So, that's my thoughts on the visual aspects of the presentation, but how about the audio presentation, especially in regards to the English dub? To be honest, way better than I expected. Speaking of the music, the score made for the anime overall, while not the most memorable OST I've heard in an anime, it does at the very least leave an impression, and that's better than not leaving any at all. The symphonic theme that opens the anime I feel perfectly captures the melancholic loneliness of the vastness of space while also capturing that foreboding feeling of what is to come. As for the rest of the soundtrack, while it is present, is very understated, usually underlying the calmer moments, or is just not present, letting the ambiance or the dialogue take the driver's seat, only to then suddenly creep in when it gets quiet, and then BAM! It's in these moments specifically when the soundtrack ramps up to let its presence be known, and for a horror anime, it works really well. It's a good thing too to hear an OST for a piece of horror media that doesn't constantly remind you it's there. A good horror soundtrack accompanies the horror that is happening and GTFOs when it needs to. A bad horror soundtrack, on the other hand, overstays its welcome to let the audience know that the composer ejaculated their talents all over your ear holes as an ode to their own self-importance. Now, that was the soundtrack, but what about the voice acting? Or specifically, how is the dub? Well, it's damn good. Despite the reputation of anime dubbing in the West at this point not being the greatest, hell today people still give anime dub shit, a good amount rightfully so, most fans even going so far as to write off English dubs entirely, uttering a phrase you have most likely heard more than once. Subs over dubs. Look, I get why people say this, and for a perfectly legitimate reason. After all, anime is made with the Japanese language in mind, so it would make sense why Japanese voice actors would do a better job handling the material given to them. But I feel this sentiment more often than not acts more as a case of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because while I understand the sentiment is meant with good intentions by those who would say it, mostly as a warning towards other potential consumers of anime, unfortunately, it's the sentiment that ends up inadvertently pushing people away from otherwise good anime with stellar voice work from well-produced English dub jobs that you might have missed because of said sentiment. In fact, you may have noticed that in every anime hole video I've done, I've used clips from the English dubs of animes I've reviewed over the subs, and probably wondered why that is. Well, it's for 3 reasons. 1, because it looks aesthetically pleasing when I edit in clips from the anime without the subtitles, which I find distracting when I'm doing voiceover on top of said clips. It also helps with editing as I'm not switching between 2 MP4 rips of the anime I'm reviewing. Secondly, especially with anime titles that were released in the West before my time and during my youth, this was how I and many others have experienced these animes, and therefore I want to review said animes as they were presented to us Westerners, a good example being my Akira review. But before you jump to the comments to type an essay on how dubs are stupid and I'm stupid for watching them, let me save you the trouble. I understand why that wouldn't be the best thing to do considering translation/dub jobs during this period in time butchered otherwise great stories because of either terrible transliterations to said stories or worse, completely rewriting scripts to have different significance in plot details, characters, and even settings, all in a vain attempt to Americanize or censor said titles in the vain attempt of selling much more adult stories to children. Right, for kids? Thank God you're fucking bankrupt, you shit stain on the anime industry. So don't get it twisted. I'm more than aware of that potential issue and would most definitely bring it up in my reviews if need be. But what about the third reason? Well, it's one of the reasons I decided to pick up Lilycat in the first place. To highlight fantastic dub works to my audience, and to highlight actors that stood head and shoulders above the rest of the competition. This being one of them. The funny part about this is the anime could have easily have been a shitfest had the anime had a poor choice in overall casting, bad translation of the script, etc. In fact, the funny part is some of the people who voiced in this anime also voiced in the streamlined dub of Akira as well, and it was...
Hey, this isn't a dance hall, sport.
You got a bad attitude, Pops. Lighten up before your arteries harden. Hey, man, that stuff will stunt your growth.
How many times do I have to tell you punks? At least he's a paying customer.
Then I won't tell him what's in it, huh?
Fucking terrible. But in a way, I can't blame Streamline too much, as even though the dub work was bad, Streamline in comparison to more modern companies that specialize in officially translating and dubbing Japanese anime with generally bigger quantities of cash at their disposal to throw at producing a good translation and dub job, whereas Streamline didn't and took on the monumental task of not only translating the behemoth that was Akira, but also adapting the script in a way that didn't stray too far from the original, while also allowing the actors to deliver lines that synced with the pre-scored dialogue, and which clearly they didn't have the time or budget to do competently, which caused the performances to be way more strained and unnatural. Whereas Lilycat, being a much more shorter film and a smaller production, clearly worked out in their favor, as not only does the acting sound more natural, but it also helped that the lip flaps were animated in a more simple manner, allowing the actors to have more free reign in how they delivered their lines, as well as keep more closely to the original script with minor variations and overall changes in line delivery. Also, the cast in the anime is superb. Granted, most of the people in the cast you probably wouldn't recognize from a lineup, but ultimately, had this anime had been more well known and anime a more recognized and accepted medium, you probably would have known at least some of their names. But unfortunately, despite their admirable efforts, it just never came, and the sad part is, this isn't the only anime like this, and it's a tragedy. And while I would like to highlight every actor in this anime responsible for the dub, unfortunately, I just don't have the time, and while all the actors do a good job, there's only one in my mind that steals the entire show. The grumpy, too old for this shit grandpa, Mike Reynolds.
Just keep your blood pressure down, because they're the employees of the mother company and we're here to assist them on their mission. Don't get bent out of shape. We're interplanetary taxi drivers and everybody else is just along for the ride. And speaking of which, I think this one's it for me.
You're not thinking of retiring, are you?
Yep. As a famous comic book character once said, I'm getting too old for this kind of shit.
And I love his performance in this anime. Mike Reynolds as Captain Mike Hamilton, without a doubt, is the best actor of the entire cast, and it would make sense by the time this anime was dubbed, he was 59 years old, so it would make sense that the most experienced actor of the entire cast would be the best sounding voice actor of the anime. And to be honest, if it weren't for him, the anime would be a lot less memorable for me. Don't get it twisted, I feel the voice cast all around is pretty good, well, maybe except for the voice of Nancy. But to be honest, if only one voice in the cast is the weak link and the rest of the voice cast is pretty superb, and one of them being the best of the bunch, all in all, I'd say that's a win. The big tragedy of all this is the fact that this anime sold poorly and unfortunately has a very obscure profile and low status online. Hell, if you look up Mike Reynolds on BehindTheVoiceActors.com, Lilycat isn't even listed, and another sad reality is that despite how good he was as a voice actor, especially in Lilycat, and despite the fact that he has worked in some capacity on some of the most recognized animes of the time period, such as Wicked City, Go-Go 13, Robotech, Fist of the North Star, Armitage the Third, an anime I reviewed on Anime Hole, go check it out, and even other more notable ones like Akira, another anime I reviewed, Dragon Ball, Outlaw Star, Cowboy fucking Bebop and the movie, The Big O, Digimon, Wolf's Rain, and even Ghost in the Shell, and Standalone Complex, and yet you peer a little closer at his IMDb listings, and most of, not all of them, are minor or side characters, clearly showing that despite his talents, was sidelined in almost every production he was involved with. Fuck this stupid planet! Though, to be honest, he was probably okay with that. While it's a shame that veterans like Mike Reynolds didn't really get the attention that I feel he deserved or even understand the impact he would ultimately have, and unfortunately sidelined in almost every anime he was in, you have to consider the fact that he came from a different era, having been born in 1924. By the time he was in his near 60s, he probably had no clue how far anime would go and how popular in the West it would end up being. So most likely he was just happy to take any roles that was presented to him. And considering his age, he was most likely okay with not being burdened with too big a role, and I can understand that. In the end, the last anime he would voice in would be Ghost in the Shell 2.0, calling it a career in 2008, and in 2021 would pass away due to old age. He was 92 years old. As obscure of an actor he was, as well as most of his colleagues at this period in time, I find it important to pay homage to the veterans of the industry, because like I did with Joyce Kurtz in Armitage, Mike Reynolds as Captain Mike Hamilton brought a flavor to the anime that I simply miss in this day and age. And if it wasn't for people like him or his many colleagues venturing into the unknown strange land of anime, most actors being crossover actors from different parts of the voiceover industry, if it weren't for them, or in this case for people like Mike Reynolds, the anime landscape might have been a much different place to be in. So as a toast to Mike Reynolds, you may have been typecast as the grumpy grandpa too old for this shit many times over, but you're the grumpy grandpa I feel anime is sorely missing right now, and your presence will be missed. Cheers. So that's my overall thoughts on the overall presentation of the anime. But of course, presentation is meaningless if the story doesn't hold it all together. So how is the story? Well, if we are going to talk about the story, at the very least I should give you the basic gist of what the story is. In the far-off future, a group of employees of the Syncam Corporation prepare for their voyage into the deep, dark depths of space, prepping for cryosleep. It's here in the opening scene we get a taste of who these people are and how they interact with one another.
What the heck is that for?
Our Mr. Headquarters doesn't know the corporation flag?
Listen, funny boy, I'm perfectly aware it's the corporate flag. I'm asking you what you brought it on board for.
We gotta have a flag to raise on our property.
Ha! Look, bud.
Jimmy!
Right, hey, go for the promotion. Whatever twists your tits.
Huh?
What I'm interested in is the money, special mission pay.
Risk bonuses?
Now you're singing my song. Can't beat that with a stick, right, Harris? When we come back home after 40 years, we'll be able to retire and still be young enough to do some damage.
Don't worry, I'll make sure the contract's honored. Just don't forget who's keeping an eye on your efficiency reports for the board of directors, guys.
Well, I was wondering what the president's daughter was doing on this bucket of bolts. Don't despise her. She's very sweet for a barracuda, but don't touch her pussycat.
Funny vagina joke. I have nothing else to add here. I just thought it was a stupid joke. Also, I don't know if you caught that, but I totally forgot that Nancy, the blonde girl with the titular lily cat, was also the president's daughter of SynCam. You know, the company funding their expedition, which should be a bombshell that matters to the plot, yet it doesn't. Honestly, I hate it when movies or books add in specific details like this that should be a big deal, but then goes underutilized by the writer, almost as if it didn't need to be there. If you wanted to give a charitable interpretation of why said detail was added, could be that it was a red herring or just to add flavor, which could have been the intended case. However, I feel that's probably not true. I mean, imagine if Ellen Ripley was revealed in Alien that she was the daughter of the CEO of the Weyland Corporation, or that Decker was the son of Eldon Tyrell of the Tyrell Corporation for Blade Runner, only for the story to not make a big deal of it and just completely forget about it halfway through. It should be treated as a big deal, yet it's not. Also, what the fuck is the daughter of the SynCam Corporation doing on this rusty bucket of bolts? To be honest, I can get over this plot point because this is the least of the story's problems.
Don't tell me you're bringing it into deep sleep with you.
Of course, like I'm gonna leave her at home for 20 years? If I don't bring her with me, I'll never see her again.
Oh yeah, and she'll be real practical to have around for all those space mice.
A lot more practical than your little pea shooter.
Oh, this little baby? I'm the careful type. There might be aliens, kid.
Oh, for fuck's sakes. Why is the stereotypical American bringing a shotgun aboard the ship? Was he expecting a bug hunt? Anyways, after everyone drifts into stasis, the ship automatically decides to pick up some space rocks. However, one of the space rocks ends up in the ventilation of the ship after the internal arm of the ship tears open a pipe by accident, dissolving into some water. Well, that shouldn't be a problem. I mean, what harm can an alien space rock that dissolves in the ventilation of the ship in outer fucking space can possibly do? In any case, the crew finally wakes up from their slumber only to find they received an important message from a representative of SynCam, which contains concerning news.
Captain Hamilton, I'm afraid I have some rather unpleasant news to report. It appears that you have two people aboard who are not who they claim to be, nor are they employees of SynCam. Evidently, they managed to enter the training program at the center with false identification, and then joined the crew on your ship. We've investigated this, of course. I have their names and photos, which I'll put up at end of transmission, but Captain, I must emphasize the grave taints immediately.
The rest has been erased, Captain.
How are we supposed to identify these bums if we haven't even got a picture of them?
Yep, this anime turned into a scenario of 10 Little Indians. Also, what? Talk about implausible plot convenience. Now I know what you were thinking. Oh, it must have been a signal interference or something, considering they are receiving a message from Earth hundreds of thousands of light years away. That would probably cause some corruption of the video, which would make sense. However, that's not the case at all.
To leave the capsules early and erase the message, they'd have to be a systems expert.
You mean they came out of deep sleep, checked the message, and got back to the capsules before we woke up?
Yes.
And of course they erased all the good parts, but what I don't get is why they didn't wipe the whole thing.
What, are you retarded?
Wait a second. You're telling me that one of the suspects logged onto the terminal, opened up DaVinci Resolve, dragged the clip in, chopped off the part, including the identities of the suspects that is— Oh, fuck off! God damn it. Fucking Zoomers. And then spliced in a clip of static over said clip, rendered it out, and then put it back on the desktop? Get the fuck out of here with that nonsense. The thing that makes it even dumber is that whoever wrote this script bothered to write in the line where Captain Mike questioned why they would even do that, instead of, you know, dragging and dropping the footage into the recycle bin and emptying it, which would have been way easier and not draw attention to the fact that there are two people on board that are not who they say they are. Oh, I know why. It's because there wouldn't have been any tension if the video clip wasn't arbitrarily cut off at the—
Can we watch something else?
It's about to get really good. It's about to get really good. Trust me.
Point is stupid probably comes down to the fact that the computer technology in the 80s wasn't as sophisticated or as understood by the majority of people at the time, mostly being tools used by computer whizzes who understand how to code. So I can understand why that mistake could be made, but the moment Captain Mike pointed out how stupid that was should have been the moment where the writer went back and revised the script a little bit, you know? But you know what also chaps my asshole? How the fuck did a multi-billion-dollar company like SynCam end up not detecting these two fakers before they even got onto the ship?
I just don't see how a bunch of people who work for the same company wouldn't be able to recognize an imposter. You'd think they'd pick up on who the fakes were right away.
That'd be impossible, sir.
Impossible?
SynCam Corporation's a multinational conglomerate with affiliates all over the world, Captain, so when they put a crew together, those people could come from Japan, Italy, France, Australia. It'd be impossible for them to know each other.
What? That is the stupidest shit I've ever heard. Why does SynCam think that's a good idea? Not just mentioning the logistical headache that the language barrier that would be created just by having different ethnicities who speak different languages to each other would create, but that would just create a security risk as well. Why not just have employees of different countries of origins be exclusively on board with one another instead of an international mix of employees? And the thing is too, this is even bigger of a laugh when you consider that the original dub is in Japanese, which just makes this point even funnier to consider because it just raises more eyebrows than it probably intended. Like, do they all speak the same language? I suppose, but then why even bring this point up to begin with? It's just odd to call attention to a specific detail when it doesn't even really seem to matter at all. Ah, fuck it. In any case, the main crew ends up speculating that the suspects on board are probably time jumpers looking to evade a criminal sentence.
I can't imagine what it'd be.
We can't let them run around free on the ship.
Nobody's crazy enough to go on a 40-year round trip to some rock in the middle of nowhere just to play Robinson Crusoe.
Time jumpers, we're dealing with a couple of criminals, sir, that's it.
He's probably right, Captain. Once in a while, these guys fake their way onto a starship so they can spend 40 or 50 years hibernating in space without getting much older. When they get back to Earth, no one's around anymore to remember their crime.
They wouldn't have a snowball's chance in hell of pulling it off if we didn't have the deep sleep capsules, but this way they can start from scratch, commit new crimes. It's a pretty slick way of beating the system.
Some time jumpers, just great.
We gotta do it.
We have to do what?
We need to find who the jumpers are and put them in custody.
You've got to be kidding. On a ship this size, we're all prisoners. Just let them be. It's not that serious. Besides, there's not much we can do about it anyhow.
I know what you're thinking. Mike sounds like a callous asshole for not giving two shits about the criminals wandering on board the ship, but there actually is a reason for that. I'll get to it when I cover the spoilers. The main crew decide on keeping mum on the revelation about the suspects from the rest of the SynCam employees, wisely so, addressing the others about their role on the ship, but is cut off by Redhead, who exclaims that something is wrong with the ship, showing camera footage of the pipe that was torn open, prompting 3 of the crew members to run off to fix it. Cutting back to the mess hall, the main crew are discussing the situation involving the suspects on board, before Redhead mentions that someone managed to reprogram the remote manipulator, whatever the fuck that is, which seems to concern the others, but Mike's saying he would rather everyone just ignore it.
That goddamn cat is nuts!
Hey, I warned you not to bother her. Come back! Lily!
Pretty fond of cats, are you?
I suppose I am. They're a lot better than a dog.
Hey, I love dogs myself.
Got that right. I've got 10 of them at home in Florida, and I'm proud of them all.
What a fucking idiot. Yeah, I love my dogs so much that I left them all on Earth while I'm a popsicle in deep space. So when I come back, I'll find all my dogs I really love so much are all dead of old age. Because, you know, most dogs don't live past the age of 20. I like moments like these because when you watch it back, this anime, knowing the full context of what happens, it just makes you go, ah, I see what they did there. Beef McBighuge out of boredom starts to dungeon crawl through the halls of the ship before sensing something is wrong, pulling out a shotgun. Cutting back to the mess hall, token black guy and brown vest are tasked with an assignment, walking down the same corridor Beef McBighuge was walking down, only for brown vest in a panic to hit the emergency switch, only to find that Big Huge is dead. Cutting to the infirmary, the ship's doctor does an autopsy on his body, only to find something concerning.
Captain, if I didn't know better, I'd swear he suffocated from Legionnaire's disease. His lungs are full of bacteria.
Bacteria? How can that be if the ship was sterilized?
I never said that the bacteria were from Earth. Take a look inside his lungs. Fascinating. I've never seen anything move like that.
You gotta be fucking...
Patience. Well, here we go. Now we have a clear and defined threat. The revelation now concerning the captain to the point of ordering the whole crew to check the rest of the ship for any security risks. Eventually, Mike and Co, walking back to the bridge, finds the red blazer wearing Aussie snooping through the computer, mentioning the video regarding the two suspects on board, asking Captain about it in an accusatory fashion. The Captain having none of it. The convo being cut short due to the news that the doctor is now dead as well, forcing the captain's hand to start interrogating the rest of the crew one by one just to see who the perp is.
Date of birth. Come on, Dorothy. I'm not thrilled with this either. But since all of you agreed, we have to go through with it. Date of birth, please.
I was born on May 10th, 2241.
You're 23.
Education?
I graduated from Washington University.
And had a baby while you were at it. Now that's the kind of higher education that really builds your brain muscle, eh?
Just what do you think?
Barry, shut up. Now let's continue.
Prying son of a bitch! We all have something we don't want to tell anybody. We want to keep our lives secret. But if I knew what yours was, I wouldn't laugh about that.
Stop. This is clearly unrealistic. An Australian with a gun? Ha! Fake and gay. Okay, for real, I do like this scene as it does show that things are starting to fall apart a bit, as it naturally would in these circumstances, that they are all stuck on the ship not knowing who the killer is, but... To be honest, one of my big issues with this anime is how little emotion they show to the fact that the crew are dropping like flies. No, really, despite the wonderful acting, the characters show very little expression over the events. Hell, literally during the interrogation, Mike gets a call from Redhead informing him that two of the crew members in the hangar haven't reported in yet, discovering that two more crew members are now dead from the mysterious circumstances. Yet, the rest of the crew seem to handle the news that the crew are dropping off like flies pretty well, all things considered. It just takes me out of the moment, considering that despite the fact that 4 people in the course of 30 minutes have dropped dead of the same bacterial infection, yet they're just nonplussed, which should be cause for alarm. Fuck, you think people are concerned about the goof right now? This would make me shit my pants. Anyway, Hero and Nancy are walking around the halls looking for Lily, you know, the cat, as the cat is seemingly missing.
Lily!
If she were alive, she'd be around your age now.
Huh?
Nothing. I'll look around this way.
Huh, that's not a first line at all. What? Oh, nothing. Just talking about my dead girlfriend I once had. It's kind of a bad habit I have. I just spontaneously bring up details of my traumatic past to random strangers for no reason other than to enhance the drama of the plot. Ignore me. Hiro and Nancy split up, Nancy seemingly finding Lily walking down a hall, making a metallic clanking sound, only for the cat to seemingly disappear. Cutting back to the interrogation, Hiro runs back in, informing the rest that all the bodies are now missing, only leaving behind their clothes. Okay, I can't hide it any longer. If you've been paying attention, you've probably caught on to the various movie references I've been making throughout my review, as well as specific details in regard to the plot and aesthetic design. the retro future looking ship, a crew in deep space working for a big name multi-billion-dollar company, as well as a bacteria that infects their host that causes their bodies to disappear and leave behind their clothes. If you couldn't tell already, this anime is not only a huge ripoff of Ridley Scott's Alien, but it's also a ripoff of John Carpenter's The Thing. Yeah, this anime is basically a huge homage to both films, but to be fair, I think it does it pretty admirably. I think the reason why I ultimately didn't dock it points for lack of originality is simply because it uses the already pre-existing ideas those IPs presented and reimagined it in their own vision in a unique and earnest way. So yeah, I'm not mad at all. If anything, it's a miracle that the legal departments of both 20th Century Fox and Universal Pictures respectfully didn't slap this anime with the cease and desist. And honestly, the only reason I feel it didn't was they just didn't know it existed. Things are not going well with people being picked off one by one. Barry starting to suspect that Hiro might not be who he seems to be, considering he came back alone instead of with Nancy. Speaking of which, Nancy hitting the emergency switch in hysterics, the rest of the crew to find a grisly scene of the wall consuming Nancy's cat Lily, to which, aside from Nancy, don't show much of a reaction from it. In fact, Hiro, seemingly being so nonplussed about what he saw, puts his face right up to the bloody hole. Alright, Hiro, I don't hate you, but when you do stupid shit like that in a horror film, I gotta dock you some points. Darwin would be ashamed. Now, before I continue though, I must warn you that from here on out, we will be dealing with some pretty major spoilers. So if you want to know what my conclusion of the anime is, without spoiling it, skip to this time code right here. Alright, let's go. They end up jettisoning the entire wing to cordon off the rest of the ship, suspecting that the alien bacteria was causing the entire ship to deteriorate at a rapid rate. Speaking of Darwinism, Dorothy, the girl from Hong Kong, we find is taking a scan of herself to check for bacteria in her lungs, which is smart. Except for one problem. She was split up from the group in a horror film. Guess what happens? That's right, surprise non-consensual tentacle rape. The rest of the group wondering where Dorothy is, Hiro elaborates that she went to the medical wing to get a scan of her body. Barry accusingly asking him how he would know that if he was supposed to be with Nancy, Hiro throws the accusation in his face. Meanwhile, the hangar bay doors open up of its own accord, which gets Blonde Guy McGee and Wilford Brimley, who were checking on the shuttle, sucked out into the vacuum of space, killing them both. Barry decides to not let Hiro off the hook and prods him further on how he knew where Dorothy was to begin with. Turns out Hiro scanned himself for the bacteria as well without notifying everyone to check if he wasn't infected like the others, which is treated like some big revelation. However, that seems pretty reasonable to me. He mentions how the doc remarked that the infection was similar to Legionnaire's disease, remarking an incident several years ago at a convention where multiple people died from the disease in a similar fashion. And the reason why was because the bacteria was spread due to the poor circulation of air, spreading the disease. Hiro also suspecting the reason they are dealing with alien bacteria was due to that rock penetrating a vent in the ship.
I think depending on the physical environment, it won't survive everywhere on board the Saldes. And that's, I think that's why Dorothy came here.
I don't want to hear this!
Yeah, but what happened to all of them? Did the bacteria eat them?
I don't think we'll ever know that. There are bacteria that'll metabolize on Earth in a short period of time, but no terrestrial aerobic bacteria that I'm aware of can completely dissolve a set of human bones without a trace.
Very intriguing. Medical man, eh?
It's a hobby.
Now that's funny. Something just doesn't seem right. Maybe it's because company data have Mr. Hiro Takagi specialized in space engineering and not medicine. I guess they must have gotten things all backwards.
Yeah, now I think I got it. I don't know why I didn't pick it up. You're not an employee of the corporation either now, are you? You're a detective.
Huh?
All I ever said was that medicine was a hobby. I don't remember saying that I specialized in it. What do you have up your sleeve?
The game's done, kid. You shouldn't have said either.
Very good, Mr. Detective. Your patience has been rewarded. You found the mad gunman who murdered those 3 men on King Street. I figured I was safe hiding on a starship for 40 years. I never thought you'd be willing to tell me quite this far.
Yep. Turns out, Hiro and Barry were the 2 imposters all along. Remember this point right here earlier on?
We can't let them run around free on the ship.
Nobody's crazy enough to go on a 40-year round trip to some rock in the middle of nowhere just to play Robinson Crusoe.
Time jumpers, we're dealing with a couple of criminals, sir, that's it.
He's probably right, Captain. Once in a while, these guys fake their way onto a starship so they can spend 40 or 50 years hibernating in space without getting much older. When they get back to Earth, no one's around anymore to remember their crime.
Yeah. Turns out Hiro murdered some thugs who turned his sister into a drug-addicted prostitute who died from overdosing. So to avoid prosecution, he forged a fake identity as an employee of Syncam in order to avoid jail time and run out the statute of limitations. And Barry was the detective trying to put an end to a drug/prostitution ring that his sister was involved with. His investigation falling apart due to Hiro's actions, costing him a promotion. So to get some payback, went undercover to find him and bring him in.
Thanks for the confession. I appreciate it. When everything goes well in those rare moments, it's nice to see your efforts rewarded.
Just a minute, you can't arrest him here.
Normally you'd have a point there. I usually leave everything up to the captain of the ship since whatever happens during the run is under his command. I don't much care to get involved with the stuff that doesn't concern me directly. But our jobs here are different, Captain. Yours is to bring the ship home. However, my responsibility is to bring this here bad guy home.
I assume that message then from the personnel manager was your trick?
I'm afraid it was at that. The company was very cooperative. When I was first given this file, the only bit of information I had was the murderer was a medical student who'd escaped to the moon on a false Syncam ID card. That message was my one last hope.
If this were any kind of a normal situation, I'd have nothing at all to say about how the affair was handled. But take a word of advice. If I were you, I'd certainly have my lungs checked for any trace of bacteria.
Come on, Captain. Being a detective, I've run up against trouble a hell of a lot worse than some outer-space chicken pox. I'm talking about your armed gangs with submachine guns and high-tech explosives and pissed off to boot. Now, you just may be right. My body could be riddled with this stuff, and so perhaps I'll snuff out like Morgan. But as of this moment, I'm still alive. And so is this murdering bastard. And as long as I'm alive, it's my responsibility to get him back to Earth for trial. He's the criminal, and I have to arrest him.
You're far too young.
What do you mean I'm too young? I've got to be the same age as you, Captain.
You think so? How old am I then? How about her? I just passed 240. Carolyn's 150 years old, right?
I'm 151.
And this is where we end up with one of the most fascinatingly great and well thought out scenes I've ever seen in an anime.
What, Guy, Walt, Dular? They were all of them anywhere between 150 and 200 years old, if you go by Earth time computation. Space navigation isn't really everything it's cracked up to be. Thanks to the ship's cryohibernation system, our bodies don't get much older with every trip. Well, at least not physically, that is. The trouble starts when we return from a voyage in space. Everyone's thrilled to be home until they realize that 40, 50, or 60 years have elapsed back where they came from. You become... I was so excited by my first voyage. I got back to Earth and met my son, who I'd left as a baby. He'd grown into a man older than I was. But not even that could kill the fascination for me. No, that died after the second trip. There was no more reason to come home. All my family and friends were long dead. But But even more than that, I can't catch up with the new age, new science, new theories, a flood of new information. People treated me like a living fossil, and I realized I'm an anachronism. Not quite useless, but annoying to have around. So I escaped back into space and returned to a different new age. I've done it many times. It doesn't really matter what I tell you, after all. You can go ahead and bring him back for his trial, but you'll find out. You'll experience it for yourself. There'll be nobody left to welcome you, except the computer keeping records of a crime committed 40 years ago.
When I first watched this scene for the very first time, I paused the video and was just taken aback and stopped to ponder what he just said a lot longer than I thought I would. This has to be one of the most measured and meticulous pieces of story writing in an anime that I've ever seen, especially in regards to the nature of space travel. Think about the amount of shows, films, and even anime for that matter that take place in space. Usually, space travel is typically depicted in a very positive and even adventurous and fun light, and while it can make for a fun story, these depictions don't really touch upon the realities of how big space actually is. While certain media like Aliens touches upon this concept, with Ripley being informed by the Weyland Corporation that Ripley's daughter died of old age in between films due to her being locked in cryostasis for many years before being rescued and reawakened, that was more considered a small detail in that film. As for 2014's Interstellar, the film does touch upon this concept a bit more, with Joseph Cooper's family aging faster the farther he gets from Earth, and shows the effect that has on Cooper emotionally as a result. But that was mostly used as a plot device to touch upon the urgency and importance of Cooper's goal that he needs to complete before he runs out of time to save the Earth and his family. As for Lilycat, it presents this concept as an unfortunate reality of traveling to the far outer reaches of space. To boldly go where no man or woman has gone before, the reality is you have to leave everything you know and everyone you love behind, and it shows the ramifications it can have on your soul. This is one of the main reasons I decided to review this anime, being that this one scene made me realize how powerful anime can be as a way of transmitting ideas and concepts through the use of storytelling with said medium, making people think about things that you probably wouldn't have thought about before. You know, instead of just this. Don't get it twisted, I like that shit too. I just wish there were more animes like Lilycat being made, if you catch my drift. And despite all that stuff I just said, the anime follows that up with this bullshit.
Don't shoot it!
Because we've got gravity generators doesn't mean you can blast away anytime you feel like it.
For all that talk about why I like this anime, it's shit like this that reminds me how flawed it is. And it's a slap in the face considering this is the scene that follows the previous one that I liked so much. For as much realism the anime tries to put in when it comes to space travel, it's clear that whoever wrote this script didn't have a full grasp on Newton's laws of motion. Yeah, an object in motion stays in motion until an external force acts upon it, which is clear they at least have that concept down, and it would have made sense if they were in 0G. Except they're not. As Hiro plainly stated,
because we've got gravity generators doesn't mean you can blast away anytime you feel like it.
Which means to me that despite this little detail, the writers clearly forgot about Newton's third law of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You know what the opposite reaction would be that would stop them both from flying through the air due to the recoil from a shotgun blast? Gravity, you dumb asshole! And I thought I was the dumbest kid in school, and I went to special ed. No, that's not a joke. To be honest, at this point, it pretty much just becomes a scenario of surviving the monster. More crew members end up falling prey to it, Captain Mike taking some proactive measures by making a fucking flamethrower to combat the monster, Captain Mike busting into the main server room to attempt to take back control of the ship, running into another cat that looks like Lily, the cat leaping at Mike, who just torches the feline only to reveal that the cat was a robot. A robot!
Lily Cat?
Fuck you. Seriously? Computerized animal-shaped technological robot? I haven't heard of a more forced acronym since the word DOOMP.
And something I can use to access the lab's main server?
Perhaps. But first you need to take a dump.
Wait, what?
A dump? A digital optical output mounted proxy.
I mean, let's think about this for a second. Lily Cat was made specifically so it could infiltrate the Saldus unbeknownst to the crew by taking the form of a cat, but not just any cat, the exact look of Nancy's cat, Lily, which would mean this would have had to have been planned out in advance. But let's ask a reasonable question. Why a cat? In fact, why Lily? This just brings up way too many questions, but I'll bring up one. Why not a humanoid? Well, I know the most obvious answer. It's because Studio Pierrot probably didn't want to get sued. But let's mention Alien again. In comparison, Ash the humanoid robot makes sense. Wayland Yutani made humanoid androids that can mimic human beings for multiple purposes, but in Alien, the reason Ash was aboard the ship was to covertly integrate with the crew and was so convincing as a human double that they all, as well as the audience, had no clue. So when it was revealed that the Wayland Yutani Corporation gave Ash the order to preserve the life of the xenomorph, with the given order, crew expendable, it comes as a huge shock to the audience when one of the crew is revealed to be synthetic and going out of its way to attempt to murder the crew to preserve the life of an alien over the lives of the human crew. But most importantly, logically and logistically, it makes sense in context to the story and lore of the Aliens universe. Lily Cat? Makes no fucking sense. First off, was the cat robot already pre-existing before the mission of the Saldus was even arranged? Or was this cat developed by SynCam in order to specifically mimic Nancy's cat? That just sounds like a waste of money and R&D, but this idea falls apart when you consider the question, what would have happened had Nancy had decided to not bring Lily aboard the Saldus? See how this idea just falls apart the moment you start asking these questions? But what do I know? SynCam's plan actually worked, so fuck me, right? Alright, I think it's about time to wrap up this story. Things are just going pear-shaped as you would expect them to, as not only is the monster destroying the ship inside and out, but because Mike has lost complete control of the ship, it seems there's very little they can do. Barry also turns into a tentacle porn monster, all hope seeming lost. Hiro actually considers pulling a Kurt Cobain, however Mike hasn't lost his resolve and shows both Nancy and Hiro a way to escape. An old NASA shuttle that Mike had stored away in secrecy, Mike deciding to sacrifice himself by blowing up the Saldus, so that the monster doesn't survive, and allowing both Hiro and Nancy enough time to escape to a nearby planet. Rest in pepperonis, Captain Mike. Rest in pepperonis. However, it turns out that the monster survived as it latched itself to the shuttle the two were escaping on. However, the monster meets its end as it burns up in the atmosphere of the shuttle's entry, leaving Hiro and Nancy alive and hopeful as they make their way to the planet below. However, I don't think this ending is as happy as Studio Pierrot made it seem to be, as the planet they're going to might not be as hospitable as they may think. So chances are, they probably are screwed. But nevertheless, an ending is an ending regardless. And that was Lilycat. You know, this anime is very easy to dump on, and rightfully so, as there are plenty of flaws in this anime. That being said, I liked it a lot more than I thought I would. I'm very glad I decided to give this anime a chance, as despite its flaws, the things it does well, it does really well. And that truly matters, from the score, solid production chops, even with a low budget, and even the surprisingly good dub work for an English release really puts it over the top for me. Hell, even the flawed story writing and details, and even the fact of it being a ripoff of both Alien and The Thing, kind of adds to the charm of this anime, because it does it so earnestly that it ends up being endearing. Overall, would I recommend this anime? Yeah, I would actually. If you want to see it for yourself and even want to get a copy of it, this anime is still being sold on Amazon, Right Stuff, and even eBay. And considering it was only $20, I think the price is worth it. I came into this anime expecting absolutely nothing, and I feel a lot of people back in the day gave a pass on this anime on the basis that it was just an Alien and The Thing ripoff. And after having watched it, I came away pleasantly surprised, as the anime defied my expectations. This is the anime you watch when you're looking for a pleasant surprise. And if you get your hands on it, I feel you will be too. It's uneven in certain spots, but overall, a solid recommendation. Well, that's it for this episode of Anime Hole. I know it's been a while since I've made an episode for the show, and I promise to make sure that I get episodes done in a more consistent manner so that episodes come out more regularly. That being said, next time, we're going to cover some real shit. And I mean shit. Till next time.